There comes a moment when the search for happiness reaches exhaustion. You have read the books, practiced the meditations, forgiven and affirmed and manifested. Yet a quiet discontent lingers beneath every victory. The world still trembles under the same fragile balance of joy and fear. And in that silence between efforts, a realization begins to stir. The problem has never been out there. Every mystic who ever glimpsed truth eventually said the same thing in different tongues. Jesus called it blindness. The Buddha called it illusion. Modern psychology calls it cognitive distortion. And David Hoffmeister, echoing the Course in Miracles, put it simply: you have a perceptual problem. Until you admit this, happiness remains a rumor. It sounds almost too simple, almost insulting to the clever mind that has built empires of self-improvement. But look closer. What if every conflict, political, relational, emotional, was not a separate wound but the same fracture seen through different angles of perception? What if our entire experience of pain is an error of seeing? We live under a hypnotic assumption that perception equals reality. Yet perception is a filter, not a mirror. It bends the light of truth through the prism of belief. When you look at a mosquito and feel irritation, you are not reacting to the insect. You are reacting to the story your mind tells about it. To the ego, that story feels real enough to steal peace. But what if nothing external has ever had that power? The Course insists that the world you see is a projection of thought, not its cause. Physics quietly nods in agreement. The observer shapes the observed. You do not suffer the world, you suffer your interpretation of it. And interpretation is choice. The first act of true awakening is not noble sacrifice or ecstatic vision, it is humility. The humility to say, I have been mistaken about everything. That sentence is the doorway to heaven disguised as surrender. For as long as you insist that the problem is outside, the solution will stay out of reach. But the instant you recognize that the problem is perception itself, correction becomes available, immediate, and effortless. The modern mind resists this idea. It prefers analysis to confession, strategies to silence. It wants a method to repair perception, without admitting that perception itself might be false. But perception built on false premises can only repair itself into new illusions. Imagine an artist who paints with tinted glasses. No matter how skillful his brush, the colors will always be distorted. The glasses must come off before he can see what he is doing. The same is true of consciousness. To perceive through guilt, fear, or defense is to paint over reality with shadows. Admitting that you have a perceptual problem is the act of taking off the glasses. It does not make you weak. It makes you available to truth. The universe rushes in the instant you stop defending your viewpoint. Every grievance, every irritation, every moment of anxiety is evidence that you still believe something outside can threaten what you are. When a mosquito steals your peace, the cosmos smiles at the irony. The infinite spirit disturbed by an ounce of wings and sound. Yet that absurdity reveals the whole mechanism of suffering. The smallest disturbance exposes the greatest illusion, that peace can be lost. The Course uses this admission as the cornerstone of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not moral approval, it is lucid perception. It means seeing that no attack ever occurred except in mistaken thought. From this perspective, forgiveness is automatic. You stop demanding that illusions behave differently and simply recognize them as illusions. So how do we begin to see differently? Through what the ancients called mind training, watching thoughts with uncompromising honesty until the watcher remembers itself as awareness rather than opinion. It is not suppression but exposure. Every belief is invited to the surface, every emotion laid bare, every judgment questioned. Nothing is hidden, for what is hidden seems real, What is seen in light dissolves. Jesus once said, "To learn this course requires willingness to question every value you hold." In psychological language, it means the ego must lose its job as editor of reality. No belief is sacred if it obscures peace. Lesson 79 of the course summarizes the whole path in one line. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. The world's problems multiply because we keep mistaking their identity. Health, finance, relationships, different masks of the same misunderstanding. 1,000 symptoms, one cause, the belief in separation. Even modern neuroscience stumbles into this truth. The brain does not record reality, it predicts it. It builds a hallucination and compares sensory data against its guess. Consciousness experiences its own projection and calls it the world. In that sense, the Course's statement that the world is an hallucination is not mystical poetry. It is cognitive science thousands of years ahead of its time. But knowing this intellectually is not enough. The revelation arrives only when you feel the futility of trying to manage the dream. You cannot fix hallucination with more hallucination. You can only wake up. To admit a perceptual problem is the spiritual equivalent of the addict's first step, powerlessness. The ego trembles at that word, yet powerlessness is the portal to real power. When you relinquish the fantasy of control, the larger intelligence, the Holy Spirit, universal mind, field of coherence, whatever name comforts you, can finally operate through you unobstructed. Its correction is instantaneous because it never saw the error as real. Consider the human obsession with manifestation. We attempt to rearrange the dream while remaining asleep. We affirm, visualize, attract, and yet still chase satisfaction. Even if the manifestations arrive, a house, a lover, a boat, the underlying ache remains. Because desire aimed at the future is confession of lack in the present. As long as you seek happiness through form, you testify against your own wholeness. Manifestation in itself is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. The true creation happens not when you get what you want, but when you no longer need the world to verify your being. Then imagination becomes play rather than compensation. Hoffmeister called the world the stubborn belief that you do not have a perceptual problem. Reincarnation, he said, is merely persistence in that belief, turning the wheel again and again, trying new roles, new identities, yet refusing the simple confession that ends the cycle. Each birth another attempt to correct an error that never existed. The intellect, cornered by simplicity, always asks how. How do I see differently? How do I forgive? How do I stop perceiving? It wants a manual, a ritual, a 12-step plan. But awakening is not a project, it is a recognition. The how is replaced by now. The moment you see the mistake, it's gone. Think of it like light entering a dark room. The light does not negotiate with the darkness or analyze its causes. It simply shines and the darkness disappears. Perception is corrected in precisely that way. When awareness returns to awareness, illusion has nowhere to hide. Still, most of us prefer delay. We want enlightenment later, after one more relationship, one more accomplishment, one more reassurance from the world that we are real. The Course calls this the wish to dilly-dally in time. God calls it patience. He waits smiling outside the clock. You are free to wander for millennia, but the invitation never expires. Eventually, suffering exhausts your curiosity, and you turn inward not in despair but in quiet honesty. You whisper, "I have been mistaken," and heaven opens immediately. Even from the limited human vantage, glimpses of this shift appear as miracles, moments when fear evaporates without reason, when you forgive someone effortlessly, when love bursts through logic. Those are not anomalies, they are previews of natural perception. The transformation does not erase individuality, it redeems it. You still move, speak, create, but without the background hum of judgment. Life becomes lighter because you are no longer trying to control what was never yours to control. At the practical level, this recognition births relaxation. The war between right and wrong begins to end. You stop obsessing over choices in form. Should I go left or right, stay or leave, speak or be silent? You understand that no decision in form can threaten what you are. Guidance becomes simple because the noise of guilt fades. Relaxation is not laziness, it is alignment. In stillness, intuitive action flows with effortless precision. The Holy Spirit, the voice of truth within perception, does not shout. It hums beneath thought, leading by resonance. When the mind is quiet, you recognize its tone instantly because it feels like peace. This is the heart of happiness. Happiness is not pleasure intensified. It is resistance dissolved. It is the memory of wholeness shining through perception's veil. And it begins with the single act that every sage, saint, and scientist eventually performs, admitting that the way you see is not the way things are. The miracle is not that problems disappear. The miracle is realizing there was only ever one problem, and it was never real. When that realization dawns, the mind enters a different order of experience. The world still appears, but it no longer binds. You walk through the same streets, yet they shimmer with gentleness. People behave as they always have, but your perception of them is transfigured. You see innocence shining where once you saw offense. You hear prayer where once you heard complaint. This is not imagination, it is sanity restored. Forgiveness, in its truest sense, is not an act of will but a perception corrected. It does not say, "I forgive you for what you did." It says, "What I thought you did never actually occurred." The error was never in action but in interpretation. To see this is to awaken from the dream of guilt. In that awakening, you recognize the absurdity of judgment. The mind was never designed to be a courtroom. It was designed to be a window. Judgment fogs the glass. Forgiveness wipes it clean. Through that transparency, the light of pure awareness enters and reveals the divine architecture behind every event. When you accept that you have a perceptual problem, the entire drama of right and wrong, success and failure begins to fade. The burden of self-criticism softens. The endless evaluation of behavior, yours and others, no longer fascinates you. You realize that the only meaningful question is, am I seeing with love or with fear? Everything else is commentary. This does not make you passive. It makes you peaceful. True peace is the most dynamic force in existence because it cannot be threatened. A mind established in peace becomes an instrument of healing without effort. Its very presence alters the emotional climate around it. Without a word spoken, it transmits safety, and in that safety others remember their own innocence. The Course describes such a being as one who heals the world without a sound. Science might describe it as coherence, the brain and heart in synchrony radiating order into surrounding fields. Mysticism and physics, at last, are speaking of the same thing, consciousness harmonizing itself. Notice how easily the ego turns even spirituality into performance. It wants to be the one who awakens, the one who forgives better, the one who teaches enlightenment. But awakening is the death of that one. You do not become enlightened. Enlightenment remains when the you that needed it disappears. The mind that sees differently does not try to change the movie. It realizes it is the light projecting the film. Problems lose their magnetism because they are recognized as script variations within the same dream. Whether the scene is pleasure or pain, the observer remains unchanged. That stability is joy. Happiness, then, is not something you pursue. It is what surfaces when you stop running from stillness. The Course calls it the peace that passeth understanding because the intellect cannot produce it. It arrives when the intellect bows. So how does one live from this awareness in daily life? Begin by watching the smallest moments of disturbance. The mosquito, the delayed email, the misplaced key. Each irritation is a teacher whispering, "Here is another place you still believe perception is truth." Instead of attacking the event, use it as a mirror. Ask gently, "What am I choosing to see here? Can I look with love instead?" Then pause, breathe. Let silence correct the picture. This is the true use of prayer, not pleading but perceiving anew. The ego will argue that some things are too serious for such simplicity: illness, war, loss. Yet the law of perception does not discriminate by magnitude. If peace can be taken by a mosquito, it can be taken by anything. Therefore, peace taken by anything was never peace at all. Real peace is indivisible. This understanding does not trivialize suffering, it reveals its origin. The moment you see that every pain stems from misperception, compassion replaces judgment. You no longer scold humanity for its madness, you cradle it. For you recognize yourself in its confusion. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world begins to change. Not because matter rearranges itself by command, but because you no longer see separation to defend against. Where you once saw conflict, you see calls for love. Where you once saw strangers, you see the oneself looking back. This is the happy dream spoken of by mystics, a stage in which perception is still operating but purified of fear. In this dream, everything cooperates toward awakening. Time serves healing instead of guilt. Even loss serves remembrance. Even death becomes translation, not tragedy. Eventually, the need for perception itself dissolves. What remains is direct knowing, consciousness aware of itself without intermediary. The Course calls this the atonement. Neuroscience might call it non-dual awareness. Language fails, but the feeling is unmistakable: home. Until that timeless state stabilizes, practice remains. Each day offers another opportunity to admit again that you do not see clearly, and to let higher vision replace the old. This humility is not regression, it is maturity. Children demand to be right. Adults prefer to be free. Freedom comes from one recognition repeated until it becomes natural. The way I see is mistaken, yet I am not guilty for seeing wrongly. Guilt belongs to no one because the error was never real, and so forgiveness is immediate. You may notice that happiness blooms quietly when you stop defending your position. It does not roar, it hums beneath every breath. The smallest moments, washing dishes, feeling sunlight, hearing laughter, become portals to the infinite. Ordinary life reveals itself as the miracle it always was. You have not transcended the world. You have finally seen it truly. The perceptual problem has been resolved by no longer being believed. The eyes still open and close, but the mind behind them rests in eternity. And if doubt returns, and it will, welcome it. Doubt is just another invitation to see differently. Smile at the ego's panic and say, "Ah, here you are again, pretending the dream is real." In that gentle laughter, the illusion loses gravity. At last, the mind discovers the secret of happiness was never an achievement but an acceptance. The acceptance that you cannot see rightly alone. The light that corrects vision has always been within, waiting for your permission to shine. When you let it, you understand the Course's most radical promise, that salvation is not earned, only recognized. Forgiveness is not a task but the cessation of resistance. And peace is not achieved, it is remembered. You realize that you are and always have been the awareness watching thought, the stillness behind perception, the love dreaming of form. The perceptual problem was only the forgetting of that truth. And with that recognition, life becomes simple again. The eyes see a world, but the heart knows it as light. The hands move, but action flows through them like music. The mind thinks, but thoughts are transparent. You live as presence, quiet, luminous, free. So if you ask now, what must I do to be happy? The answer will sound almost absurdly small. Admit that you have a perceptual problem. Because in that single admission, the entire mechanism of suffering collapses. The false foundation of control gives way, and what remains is joy without opposite. This is the one thing you must do, the only thing you ever truly do. Allow vision to replace perception, truth to replace opinion, love to replace fear. Everything else happens automatically. And when the correction is complete, when you see the world as forgiven light, you will laugh gently at the simplicity of salvation. The universe, it turns out, was never hiding its happiness from you. It was waiting for you to stop pretending you weren't already home.